Hey everybody, this is Dr. Venners here to comment a little bit on the discussion sections from week 1 of U.S. history since 1877 here in the summer of 2024. Wow, y'all did a fantastic job. I'm real happy with the way y'all worked with these readings, and I'll just share a few comments that I will try to keep it brief. The problem is, we had a lot of good, rich, complicated material to work with, and so I'll just try and stay concise. So just a quick recap, what are we trying to do here with the first week? So it's called The Big Picture, and we're trying to think about where we are in space and time on this little planet where we live, and setting out to look at, just a small part of that planet and a very short span of time, right? The United States just since 1877. All right, well, let's step back some and try and figure out, how this fits in. So that's why we started out looking at that short excerpt from Cosmos about this idea of the cosmic calendar. Like, how can you even conceive of the vastness of time, right? And put yourself in some kind of context. And then we look next at How Democracies Die Explained, which helps us to think about kind of an intellectual framework for United States political history, and also thinking about demographics and the questions of race in particular, and justice, also questions of religion and culture in this time period that we're looking at in the United States since the 1870s, since the end of Reconstruction. And importantly, what that article tries to do is to help us to think clearly about how democracies fail in the contemporary world that we live in, how democracies can backslide and turn into something much less savory. How does fascism, how does dictatorship take hold of countries that were formerly democracies? Now, this was written in 2018, which seems like a long time ago now, but the overall framework is very helpful for us to think about the situation that we find ourselves in down to like this very moment, right? There was another piece that we looked at, Jonathan Franzen's piece, What If We Stop Pretending? So again, this is like big picture, thinking about global climate change, and how do we approach as individuals and as society the dawning realization that the climate of the planet is changing, it is going to get worse, and like, do we stick our head in the sand about this, or do we face the reality and figure out what to do to mitigate the situation, to make it as less bad as possible, right, for as many people as we can? And what is our understanding of hope? What is our understanding of like the practical things that we do to help create resilient neighborhoods, coherent societies, however we can, right? What are the different kinds of actions? What are the possibilities for making a society that's as strong, as whole and coherent as possible, so that we can face the very, very dire situation that we find ourselves in? Now, one thing I'd point out about that one also is that was written in, 2017? That was well before the Biden administration and Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not named very well. In fact, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it was passed in August 2022. I believe that's right. It's the biggest piece of climate legislation in the history of the world, okay? It was a major, major legislative accomplishment. The fact that it got passed in the particular partisan situation that the Biden administration found itself with Congress is nothing short of miraculous. It is a total game changer, all right? Franzen you remember, and y'all pointed this out, Franzen was saying the idea of getting the biggest countries, and this one in particular, on board politically, right, with taking the kinds of measures to completely change their economy, to drastically reduce carbon emissions, and to be able to hold the country together, to be able to change the tax system. All of these things, Franzen says in 2017 or 2018, whenever that was, he says, I'm not holding my breath, okay? Well, darned if that legislation didn't pass in 2022. Now, and I would say, again, to take us right down to the minute, we're in an election year right now, whether or not the provisions in that legislation are allowed to stand and to continue to have an effect for this country and for the whole planet over the course of the next decade or two and well beyond, I mean, that may come down to the results of the election in just a few months. Word to the wise. Okay, then we had chapter 28, right? The last chapter of our textbook, which is from 2004-ish through the very just like through the inauguration of President Biden, okay? So that chapter, even though that's the most recent edition of the textbook, it doesn't take us down to this very moment, right? I think that a lot about that chapter would have to be written somewhat differently now. Subsequent events make us think about previous events in a different light. So there is discussion there about the Trump administration and the connections of the Trump administration to the Russian dictatorship through Ukraine, and the political implications within the United States. There is some discussion about the coup attempt that extended over several months before the election in November 2020 and then culminated with the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. But we know more stuff about the whole thing now because of congressional investigations that took place. Again, let me see if I get the chronology right. I think that was the summer of 2022 as well. Public congressional investigations that lead us to conclusions that this was a much bigger attempt to undermine American democracy, to install a dictatorship than was understood at the time that chapter was written. Whew. Okay. Then we also have the primary historical document, right? That's the speech by Bob Mueller, who at the time was the director of the FBI in 2011 in New York City. This is I think this is only the second time that I'm using this document with a class, and so I'm still trying to get a feel for what do students get from it, right? So let me just say a couple things. Y'all did a good job of sort of like understanding the speech itself and being able to define what are the iron triangles. That is this combination that Mueller warns about of organized crime, a different kind of organized criminal network, as he described at the beginning, organized crime and elements of government, so corrupt government officials, and elements of big business. And that what he's warning against, that the FBI is noticing and working against, is that these so-called iron triangles are operating across national boundaries. They're beginning to affect the economy around the world in different ways. And they may have connections with terrorism of different kinds, and they may subvert the governments of different countries. That's 2011. That's a long time ago too, right? So one of the questions in the prompts was, what might be some of the implications if elements of these iron triangles, again, as Muller says it, they're not connected to each other by ideology. All of these actors, they're sort of marriages of convenience. They cooperate with each other because it's convenient for them to use each other to cooperate to the extent that it brings them money and power, okay? So they're not committed to any idea, any vision of the future, right? Other than, I want what's mine, right? Get whatever you can as fast as you can and hold on to it. Okay. So what would happen if elements of these iron triangles learn how to deftly manipulate social media, which of course in 2011 was a much tamer environment than it is now, okay? What would happen, I asked, if elements of these iron triangles were able to capture a state, capture a national government somewhere in the world, or more than one national government in the world? All right, I don't want to go into extraordinary detail in this, what I want to be a short video, and I also don't want to be misunderstood as being a partisan, right? As being attached to any political party in this country or in any other country. That is not where I'm coming from at all. I am not a member of any party. Never have been, never will be. That's mostly for religious reasons, but probably not the religious reasons. Whatever you think that means, it's probably not. You'd have to ask me about it, in some other context, and we can talk about it. So I'm not opposing or promoting any particular candidate at this moment or at any other time. But I teach politics. I have to think about this stuff, and my mission is for my students to have as much clear information as possible, to have an intellectual framework for us to be able to understand the stuff that is coming at us, right? And stuff is coming at us all the time. It is to some extent meant to be overwhelming. A perfectly reasonable response in this kind of a media environment, not just social media, but just in general, is to check out, right? It's just too much. Another reasonable response, I mean, I get it, is to say, well, all politicians are corrupt, the parties are the same, they should all go to hell. I get that. Another kind of response is to get completely exercised and agitated about everything that comes across our news feed. All of these are possibilities. What I try to do for myself, and what I try to do for my students, and what I try to do, to the extent that I'm engaged in social media, is to do kind of what we're doing in this big picture week of the course, which is, let's think about the whole thing, right? Let's think not just in terms of what's happening right this moment, but let's think in terms of decades, centuries. Let's think about the past. Where did all of this come from? And let's think about the future. Where is it all going, right? Part of the reason that we study history, and I think I mentioned this already in the first video, we study history to remind ourselves that those people in the past made decisions. Individuals and groups of people made decisions. They made decisions that have, the accumulated results of all previous decisions has led us to this moment. The human experience is lots and lots of decision making, individual and collective. That includes me. That includes us, right? What do I do next? What do we do next? For what purpose? For what goal are we here? Now, you may believe and say, well, no, there's no purpose. Okay. There's no goal. Okay. You may say, well, one person's decisions don't make a difference. I disagree. I think that we have to pick the right purpose. We have to pick the best, highest purpose. And I think that each individual's actions do make a difference to a greater or lesser degree down through the ages. That's why I wanted us to think in part about cosmos and the butterfly effect. And even if you can't immediately perceive it, everything has an impact. Choose wisely. Okay, all of this is to say, sorry, I got a little excited there. All of this is to say, what happens if the iron triangles get a hold of social media and figure out how to manipulate people with it? What happens if the iron triangles grab a hold of one or more governments in the world? These questions animate the whole history of the 2010s and the 2020s so far. And part of where we need to go to understand what has happened to the United States and the rest of the world just now, and it's not over, it's still happening. Part of where we need to go is to Russia and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and during the 1990s the development of what's called the oligarchs in Russia. It's wide open capitalism without any rules, and where a few people get fantastically wealthy, primarily on oil and natural gas extraction. By the early 2000s, the head of the government of the Russian Federation was a dictatorial figure named Vladimir Putin. He's still there. And he attempted, again, on the strength of this hydrocarbon money, right? Oil and natural gas extracted from Russia and sent around the world to fuel this contemporary economy. He attempted to shore up friendly governments, client states on Russia's borders. He's got Belarus in his pocket already, and the next important prize was Ukraine. And so during the early 2000s and down to right now, the focus of the Russian government and of Putin himself and his allies has been to capture the Ukrainian state, even if they don't gain control all of the territory, literally, of Ukraine, but to be in control of that country. And that has everything to do with the way the Russian government put its finger on the scales of the presidential election in the United States in 2016. The way it relates to social media is that essentially the Russian government, through the Internet Research Agency and these other hole-in-the-wall places in St. Petersburg, run in part by Prigozhin and the Wagner Group. You remember, if you're paying attention to the news, Prigozhin was the guy who tried to do a coup or something on the road to Moscow last summer, and then mysteriously he died in a plane crash right after that. These folk learned how to manipulate Facebook. They bought data from Facebook that Facebook freely sold through this other company called Cambridge Analytica. And they didn't make stuff up to make Americans crazy. They just identified the things that already divided us and chose to amplify them on social media. And they didn't even have to do it for the whole country. They just had to pick enough of the states where, because of the way the Electoral College works, they just had to pick the key, quote-unquote, battleground states where the presidential election was going to be decided. The long and short of it is, in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they put out messages in 2016 on Facebook targeting older white people, and the message was about, the messages were nuts, about Hillary Clinton, about Democrats engaging in cannibalism. I'm sorry to even have to say that out loud, but I'm not making it up. They also targeted African American voters in these states. These are states that have important African American populations. They worked on dredging up footage from the 1990s that you could conclude the message was Hillary Clinton doesn't like black people. Not the truth. It had to do with the crime bill from the mid-1990s. That's a complicated discussion that we'll get to in a future chapter. But so the point was, scare old white people into coming to the polls, okay, in larger numbers than they would have before, and depress young black voters so that they don't come to the polls at all. So they just say to hell with it, right, and stay home. And you only have to do that enough, and it's cheap, pennies on the dollar, on the ruble, if you will, to manipulate Facebook enough to tip the balance. And the whole presidential election in 2016 was decided by something crazy like 50,000 votes in these few states. Today what we have is these iron triangles firmly in charge of the Russian Federation, trying very hard over a decade at least to gain control of Ukraine. For 4 years or so, did their very best to capture the federal government of the United States. And again, at the risk of sounding like hyper-partisan, this is not where I'm coming from, but I can't lie to you, right? Those same forces, those same iron triangles, they are at work in the current election season in the United States right now. They also worked on subverting NATO and the European Union, the Brexit campaign of 2015-2016 that resulted in the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, and other efforts to shake up, to undermine the strength of the EU and of NATO. All of these things are related to each other. Now you may hear, in the context of the war in Gaza, you may have heard this term, the axis of resistance. This involves Russia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, North Korea, fighting together-ish against what? Against the West, against the liberal world order. We're going to talk about these terms more as we go forward. But essentially what they're fighting against is any kind of global system that even pays lip service to human rights, that even pays lip service to the rule of law for the whole world, right? That even pays lip service to the idea that no country gets to invade its neighbor and overthrow another country's government and take its territory, right? They want a world without rules, and they're attacking the forces, the institutions, the governments that try to enforce some sense of rules, some sense of justice and order in the world. This axis of resistance, led by Russia, has been at war against the United States and the European Union and NATO at least since 2014. The question is, has the United States and its allies in this international system, have we been at war to defend democracy and the rule of law and so forth since 2014? I would say no. No, I think most of us, myself included, have taken a long, long time to even understand what was happening. So this is, I'm sorry it's so long. I'm looking at the time on this video now. This is as concise as I could make it, to try and help you to bring the various pieces of this week together. The reason that I put these readings in in concert with each other, in dialogue with each other, and just to help us think through some of the implications of what we read. And it does take us up to the minute in terms of what's happening in the United States and around the world right now. Tell me if you got questions. If you want to talk about any of this more, then please let's do that. Also, I want to link a video that I think would help too, to help clarify some of these things. It's a relatively short talk. It's 40 minutes long maybe, from a few years ago in 2019 by a historian from the United States that I admire a great deal, Tim Snyder from Yale, where he addresses a number of these issues in, I think, very cogent, very understandable fashion. And this is his speech at the Judenplatz in Vienna, Austria, in May 2019 on the occasion of Europe Day. That's the day that the European Union marks as its founding day. He addresses these issues masterfully, and it includes decolonization in Africa and Asia, World War II and Hitler and the Holocaust in ways that are truly illuminating. So I highly recommend it. It's not required, but I really think you would benefit. I certainly have, and have read a number of his works really since then, and gotten a lot out of it. Okay, I'm going to draw this to a close. Week 1 was great. Please keep up the good work, and we'll just keep at it.